Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp and I'm the Chief Digital Manager for Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, The 7 Deadly Data Sins Emerging from Management Purgatory. It is the latest installment in the monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just click the chat icon in the upper right-hand corner for that feature. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or if you'd like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using #DataEd. To answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and would likewise send the link to the recording of this session as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now let me introduce to you our speaker for today. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. In fact, he was just here at Data Architecture Summit in Chicago. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 11 books now. The most recent is Your Data Strategy. Peter is experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as the top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. And with that, I will turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Shannon. Good to see you again, even though it was just yesterday, as you mentioned, in Chicago. So welcome, everybody. Today's actually, let's talk yesterday, though. Yesterday's was so big, they actually had to move the hotel. So, again, great job with everybody out there. We had a wonderful time and looking forward to the next one as always. So, yeah, thanks, Shannon. Great to see you. We'll look forward to the next. So, today, the material is coming from a book on data strategy that I had out about halfway through the summer. And the context for this is that, unfortunately, IT has still remained challenged in terms of what it can deliver. So we're just taking it to the most basic level. If you look at what happens in IT, only 1/3 of the projects are able to succeed with full schedule functionality and cost variables intact, which means 2/3 of them do not. Now, as Shannon mentioned, I've looked at a bunch of data management practices, but I took my practice a little further than that and went out a little further to see what's wrong with the way systems are built. And of the failures that I've studied, and there have been more than 100 that I've looked at specifically, data is at the root of every single cause of these failures. The reasons for that are kind of interesting. If we go take a look at how systems are taught. We're taught that systems are a collection of methods and procedures that are organized for a specific purpose. And the things we organize in order to do that are people, processes, hardware, software, and of course, data. Now, if you present it to people this way, unfortunately, it looks to most people like these are all equal components. Those of you that have been in the business, though, for any length of time know that these are uneven amounts. And if there is one thing in common, it's that the data portion of this is getting larger and larger and larger. Somebody said yesterday during the session, it follows the hockey stick curve, which means it's going up at an increasing rate. In fact, there's a really good way of winning almost any argument about data and volume in particular, and that is to use the words that Micheline Casey sort of presented to us at one of Shannon's conferences a couple of years back. There will never be any less data than right now, and if you wait 10 minutes and say it again, you will be still correct. So the data piece of our systems, people, process, hardware, software thing, is something that we need to pay more attention to. And that's where these 7 deadly sins came from, which is to say there's a lot of things that are going on out there that need to be different. These are the 7 that I'm going to give you today that are the most important for organizations to change. So we're going to go in reverse order. The seventh one is failing to address cultural and change management challenges. Now, I'm doing this in reverse order because I want to make sure that we spend some time on the most pressing sin, which is the one at the top. But frankly, all of these are necessary but insufficient conditions in order to do this. When we go into organizations, one of the first things that almost every organization wants to know is sort of, where am I relative to everybody else? This is often called an assessment or a readiness exercise or something along those lines. When we're looking at organizational readiness, we use a tool that was developed by Mary Lippert a couple years back that we like a lot. And really, the way to look at this is to look at the right-hand column of your screen to see the symptom that we see. For example, if we go into an organization, as we did to an organization in the Midwest a couple years back, and they were on their second attempt at doing something. I think it was moving to a services architecture. Well, they had a vision, they had skills, they had incentive, they had resources, but man, their action plan was woefully inadequate, and so we saw false starts. Similarly, if we see anxiety in an organization, we usually will see a combination of vision, incentive, resources, and an action plan, but that the skills are missing in there. And we found this particular diagram very, very helpful at helping organizations realize what kinds of things that they need to do in here to look at this. So the bottom line is, of course, all of these, vision, skills, incentive, resources, and an action plan are all necessary but insufficient conditions to put big change in organizations. And what we're talking about here are pretty big changes. Turns out that culture is the biggest impediment to the shift in organizational thinking about data. Let me give you an example or two, not from me, but from Gartner, who we like a lot, and our colleague Mario Farah has done a wonderful job of articulating this in one of his articles. He was talking specifically about appointing new leadership around data in the organization. We typically call this a chief data officer function. It may or may not be titled that. I actually like the term enterprise data executive, but nevertheless, we do need to have something around there. And yet, think about this for just a minute. You come into an organization and you tell them they need some different leadership around data, and there's an individual sitting in a job somewhere in that organization that has the title Chief Information Officer. This creates confusion, uncertainty, doubt, resentment, and resistance. And if we don't overcome each of these, we end up having more of a challenge than we have to. Now, I have to tell you from my personal experience working with the CIOs and the CEOs that I work with, about half of them say, yeah, you're right. We're really not doing as much with our data as we should, and I'm really happy to take this off my plate. In fact, when you think about it, my title is really Chief Integration Officer or Chief Information Technology Officer instead of specifically being an information officer. But the other half of them don't. And it really is bifurcated at the moment. Even though we're seeing almost all organizations adopt some form of data leadership, we're still seeing a lot of resistance to this. So Mario's written a really nice article. If you just Google the phrase, what chief data officers need to do to succeed, and Mario Faria, you'll see his article out there. It's a really thoughtful piece. Because in order to make a change in organizations of that type, it is really about change management and leadership. And we have a wonderful discipline out there already that knows how to deal with this. Where the disconnect has often occurred is that many people are simply not aware of what that specialization actually means for people. There are very good, experienced professionals who have a wonderful research history and a lot of practical experience at getting organizations to change. Many organizations, however, don't know to go find those individuals. It's kind of like when I talk to data groups and say, you know, you really need to market yourself a little bit better, and they say, oh, where would I find information on that? Well, almost any organization has a marketing organization. So go to them. They'd love to hear this. They have a communication function. They have all sorts of things. Because what we're really talking about is that we've got to make it harder to do the things that we used to do and easier to do the things that we want to do so that everybody will follow them in that process. That's just a few brief words on cultural and change management initiatives. I have an entire case study on this that if you're interested, you can download a copy from the academic journals that are out there. So if you just grab this little clip here, click on it, it'll be in your links tomorrow, or you can just go out there right now, tinyurl.com, Peter Study, and you'll see it out there to read about how some organizations have had challenges around that aspect of it. So that's our first deadly sin, failing to recognize that cultural and change management challenges are incredibly important for organizations to do this. You can't just put it out there because it's a good idea, because lots of organizations have lots of good ideas, and everybody's perspective is going to be different on this. Do not ignore this deadly sin. Sixth deadly sin, again, we're working from the bottom to the top here, is not sequencing data strategy implementation. Now, what I mean by that is that most organizations assume that they're going to have a data strategy and that that data strategy will be perfect for them and they'll get it right the first time. One of the things I like to remind people is that accounting has had actually 8,000 years to develop what we call generally accepted accounting practices. In other words, you're doing things the right way. We could call them best practices, but in the accounting world, it doesn't work that way. You wouldn't want somebody reporting their numbers to you who may or may not produce the best practices. You want somebody who's following generally accepted accounting practices in there. What this means is that you're very unlikely to get your data strategy perfect on the first try. So one of the things we urge people to do is to number their data strategies. The first data strategy will be this, which means, first of all, everybody expects there to be another version of it, a version 2 data strategy, as opposed to thinking that this one will be right, because if you put another one out, and your data strategy should evolve, of course, if you put another one out, then people say, what was wrong with the first one? Did we do it? Did we succeed? If you number them, this is the first, people will expect them to be another one. Something else, too, are you going to be really excellent at it the first time? And, of course, the answer is typically no. Most organizations are just starting out on this. Accountants have had 8,000 years to put their stuff together. We in data management maybe can trace our lineage back 100 years, where I like to trace the origin of formal data management as a practice is to the beginning of World War II, where the British discovered that they were at war with much of the rest of the world, and that there were 14 million persons of German descent living in the United Kingdom. So the British Secret Service decided that they would like to have a card, a record, for each of those 14 million persons of German descent. And then they said, oh my, how are we going to manage 14 million cards? And they, in fact, measured up the productivity they were doing and invented things that we use today, caching, all sorts of indexing schemes, different ways of access methods, et cetera, on their alternate indexing structures. All of these things were done on this. There's a very interesting book on the history of the British Secret Service that ended up with a chapter on this. It was just fascinating. The earliest mention I found of formally addressing our data management challenge problems. Here's another aspect of strategy, though, that's really important to sequence, and that's called not biting off too much. It's kind of similar where you end up with an organization where the CEO discovers data quality is important. And so he turns around to the rest of his staff and says, hey, I want you guys to go out there and make our data quality 100% perfect for everything. Well, that's frankly a consultant's dream, but at the same time, there is no point in trying to get all of your data perfect because many parts of your data are not worth improving. We should not be doing that. From a data strategy perspective, we need to look at the same dimensions here. So when we look at what's happening in the area of strategy, there really are only two dimensions that come out, and we've studied this for 50 years and haven't found any others as well. The first one is to improve operations, which I'll show on the arrow that's pointing to the right. The other one is innovation. There's been lots and lots of arguments about it, but when you get down to strategy, that's what it is. It's improve operations or it's innovate. Now, most organizations are not able to get a formalized data strategy in place. It just hasn't worked out well for them. And consequently, they aren't doing as well with their data as they'd like to, so they start to move forward. Now, if we're going to move forward and decide that we want to improve our operations, a poster child for that type of an exercise is Walmart. Walmart is consistently held up as having some of the best supply chain management operations of anywhere in the entire world. The goal, of course, for an efficiency play is to increase the organizational efficiency and effectiveness in those areas, and Walmart is absolutely world-renowned for being able to do that. However, if you're going to do an innovation play, that's where we do cool new things with data. That's a different opportunity. And the point here is that you kind of need to pick one, because Apple's people who create new strategic opportunities, and again, I'm going to dive a little bit into this. The really interesting thing that's happening in the smartphone industry right now is that the smartphone manufacturers are trying to make a series of inventions that cannot be reverse engineered. And people sort of say, well, why is that? Well, again, Apple comes up with a finger ID, to touch ID to get you to put your finger on it, and theirs works, and everybody else, they'll get there. Once they figure out what Apple did, you just take their technology apart, undo it, and you can figure out how to do it. So it may take them a little longer, but they will definitely be very good functioning fingerprint IDs on most of the Android platform within a couple of years. There are a few manufacturers that have done well in that area, but most of them have very poor fingerprint ID pieces. Same thing is going to happen for the Face ID. Those developments are only going to give Apple a little bit of a strategic advantage in terms of innovation. They'd still do it. They're still getting the innovation lead out there by packaging these things together with a commercially available phone and getting us all to pay a premium price for it in order to do that. But more importantly to that, using data to create strategic opportunities is oftentimes what people come to us and ask us questions about and say, how can we learn how to do that? And the answer is, you can. But I want you to think for just a minute now. Many organizations I go to say, well, we'd like to do both of those. So take the people, we'll just exemplify them by Johnny Ive. Most people know of Johnny Ive as a refined Englishman who's a par excellence designer, right? Phenomenal guy. And I want you to say, drop him into Walmart's environment and say, Johnny, I want you to be efficient and effective. Well, his head's going to explode because that's not the way he operates. If you knew the number of prototypes that they go through to figure out the form factors for the various phones and other pieces that Apple puts together, it would absolutely blow your mind. It's a long, time-consuming process that involves highly creative people doing really innovative things. Those are not the people you ask to be efficient and effective. Similarly, you do not want to also ask the people at Walmart who are really, really good at being efficient and effective to be creative. That's not in their DNA. We had a discussion this morning here at Data Blueprint just around a company that we're working with, and we came to the conclusion that there are a lot of engineers in this organization that we need to find out, whether they are linear thinkers or whether they are really more holistic thinkers into that whole process. So the sequencing piece of this is really to say, within what you're doing in terms of data strategy here, do not try to do both. It doesn't work. Pick one and then pick another one. In fact, the better way to do it is to actually go to go to the effectiveness and efficiency, and use the money that you save from that effectiveness and efficiency play to then go off and do your innovation. Because none of this stuff happens just by snapping your fingers. It takes time to get better at this. So again, we take the money from there and use it to fund that particular activity. Very, very nice set of sequencing. We do one more piece around the sequencing here as well, which is that when somebody tells you how to do data strategy by the book, what they say is that your data strategy, correctly by the way, should be a combination of your data governance strategy, your metadata strategy, your data quality strategy, your warehouse strategy. I won't read all these, you get the picture. The problem is nobody has these documents. The most I've run across at any organization is 4 of these, and this is a handful of the things that should be considered in there, not by any means a complete list. This is so incorrect, because the problem is if you wait till you've got all of those strategies together, you will never actually do anything in terms of actually operating strategically. So rather than try to make this an accumulation of everything, instead, take your data strategy and do one thing well, or maybe at most a combination of 3 things. For example, I've never worked with any company that has succeeded in getting their master data project to work without also including quality and governance. Where I've seen these things fail miserably is that people will install the master data solutions from the various vendors, Microsoft, IBM, you name it. They've all got very good working software out there. But if people don't know what to do with it, they will fill that really good technology up with very poor quality data. And the way you avoid that, of course, is with some data governance. Make sure that the data governance is not going to be a hindrance to this, but in fact supportive of the effort. You need to have typically 3 things in play in order to do this. So this is our version 1 of this strategy for this hypothetical organization. We can move to version 2 then. Maybe the next one is they want to work on their BI and data warehouse strategy. Well, again, we probably need some other pieces to go into place. Maybe the governance strategy is still good, but maybe we now need to look at something closer to a data acquisition strategy, given that. So a couple of pet peeves I have here, just to make sure you guys are tracking with me on this. First one is I don't like the word methodology, because it doesn't mean anything. The word methodology really means the study of methods. So when somebody says they have a methodology, they're really coming at you with a noun. It's not the proper use of the word. Just method is good enough, right? I have a method. It doesn't sound as fancy as that, but it's actually a lot more realistic. The second one is the use of the word metrics. People always want to do dashboards and metrics, right? Well, unfortunately, metrics are a different aspect of things. Metrics mean a standard unit of measurement. And consequently, you're not setting up standard units of measure when you do that. Now, I go on a little 30-second rant there for 2 things, because when you're looking at your measure of how successful your data strategy is, it is going to be judged on its effectiveness, but its effectiveness over time. Just issuing the strategy does not help. You've got to actually execute the strategy. Napoleon's strategy at Waterloo was a very good strategy. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So having the strategy is great, but you've really got to make sure it does work. Second aspect of this, too, is that your data strategy darn well be shorter than the organizational strategy. What you're talking about is people are looking at the organizational strategy and saying, how does data fit into that category? And the answer is it should be a shorter version of it. I've already mentioned the versions part should be sequential, but you should do scorekeeping on it, and you can measure the common agreement that people come to in order to do this. So this is our second deadly sin, not sequencing data strategy implementation. Our third one, failing to meet expectations. Now, it is really key to manage the expectations around data, because people have such very poor understanding in general of how it works. Most organizations, when they come into some sort of a data implementation framework, there is a business need, and the business need is something that you can look at. We actually have a technique that we use to read their 10K forms and things like that, as well as talk to the people that are in strategy. And it is clear, I think, to everybody that business needs should move us towards the solution. But if we do it in the way I've described here, there is a big challenge with that. The big challenge is we're leaving out an important variable. The important variable is what is the current state of the organization. If we don't understand the current state of the organization, we have no ability to believe that the data imperatives that we come up with will actually meet what the organization needs to have. Now, the analogy here is very much like handing the keys to a brand new Tesla to a 16-year-old driver that has limited driving experience. I don't know about you guys, but we just don't expect good results when that happens. So key to this is to make sure that you incorporate into your strategic framework where the state of the organization is, because if you do not, you end up mismatching the technology with the organization's capability to do this. And again, I'll just give you my favorite one where I've heard this at least 10 different organizations. I didn't know where to put the data, so I stuck it in the MDM. Well, if you hear that in the hallway, you know your master data management initiative is not doing well. Now, let's take it a step further. Once we have the strategy, of course, we then need to make a roadmap to say how we're going to get there from place A to place B. And this is also a place of expectations management. Because on one side, I need to deliver some business value. You typically need that to get any sort of investment. If somebody is going to invest $1, you would like them to get back $1 plus something at the end of it. On the other hand, we also have to develop some new capabilities. One of the capabilities, for example, might be improving data literacy in the organization. Well, if that's the case, it's very hard to put a tangible cost on that, although we do have some proven technology that ends up allowing people to get better at those numbers. But if we have too much invested in capabilities, it looks to management like we're running a science project. If we have too much on the business value side, we don't actually end up with the results that go into the organization. The organization doesn't get better. It's more superficial in general in order to pull that off. Let me give you a very specific example that I ran into a couple years back. I had a very good data manager that I was working with who had 5 data managers. We're going to pretend for the sake of the exercise here that they were getting paid $100,000 a piece. And the question from management is, when will you be done? And, of course, that's not the right question to answer. If your management thinks you're going to be done with this, you need to re-educate them so that they understand that what you're doing will be relevant to the organization as long as it needs an HR function. And if you can get that message across to them, they'll actually get better with it. But for some reason, we have been considered a project instead of a program in many organizations. In this instance, the individual said, that's okay. My CIO gave me 5 years. They know it's going to take a long time to come up with specific results. Now, I asked the question here, if you've got 5 data managers that get paid $100,000 a piece, do you feel it's important to show the organization every year that you're demonstrating at least $500,000 worth of value? I think the answer is very definitely yes. This manager did not. I said, no, it's okay. My CIO is giving me 5 years. I said, okay, well, how much value are you going to give at the end of 5 years? And they said, well, then I can start delivering $100,000 per employee. And I said, oh, well, looks to me like the investment in your group is about $2.5 million at that point. I might aim a little higher there to do this. And does anybody on the call here see this possible problem of 5 years? Yes, the average CIO is still in place only 2 to 4 years. Consequently, the chances for the CIO to change drastically in 5 years is actually very high. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. And the new CIO came in and said, well, I don't care what the old CIO told you. You better show me some value immediately on this. I could tell you about one little program we did in the state of Virginia here. And it's been a lot of fun. And helps to show this. Our governor started a program called the Governor's Data Interns Program. And that Governor Data Interns Program has paired graduate students from various good universities around the state, VCU, Virginia Tech, UVA, George Mason, ODU, anybody really that wants to participate in these things. Oh, George Washington too, can't forget them. They take classes of students who are looking for projects and pair them with state agencies that actually have data projects that they need to have done. And we've shown a very positive return on this investment over the last couple of years, such that the governor was pleased enough to come and give some of the awards out himself on that. So again, failing to manage expectations is an enormous, enormous problem. Number 4, not aligning the data program with the IT projects. So let's look at how this has been done in most organizations. This is what we call IT project or application-centric development. And it starts out fairly reasonably. Organizations have a strategy, and therefore they implement IT projects in order to support that strategy. The challenge with this model, though, has been that data is considered within the scope of an IT project. Now, there's nothing wrong with considering data in the scope of the IT project if you only have one project. But if any of your projects share data with any other projects, your data sharing is not a project, your data sharing is a program. And doing it in this fashion means that data will be formed around the applications, not around the organization-wide information requirements. And that the processes and the process architecture are narrowly formed around the applications, which means the opportunity to reuse data is very, very small. Now, many people say, well, that's okay, we're reusing code based on this. If you look at the actual numbers, the amount of code that we are reusing outside of the open source software movement is as close to zero as you can get. It's not actually zero, but it's very, very close. The open source software movement has a wonderful collective set of support infrastructures in place to do this. But organizations without that set of infrastructure, or who are not trying to do things along those lines, end up with serious, severe problems when it comes time to actually reusing data. So let's shift this, and let's go to look at what we call data-centric development. In support of strategy, the organization should, of course, develop specific data-based goals and objectives. That would be your data strategy under your organizational strategy. And only when those data objectives are known should you then authorize and articulate specific IT projects with an eye to organization-wide use. The advantages of this approach are enormous. Data and information assets are then developed from an organization-wide perspective. The organizational support system complements the organizational process flows, and we end up with maximum data reuse given this particular set of circumstances. Let's look at it in a slightly different way. Here's a flow chart that we drew in the book. And I have to mention that for some reason this chart didn't come out well in the book, so it actually has the wrong information. For those of you that did get the book, if you want to see the correct version of this project, give me a ring and I'll be glad to send you the right figure on it. The new version has it correctly into it. But anyway, your organizational strategy says what the organization's purpose is, and the data strategy then is how data assets support the organizational strategy. Our link then into data governance is that data strategy should be guiding the data governance piece, what the data assets do to support the business strategy. Those should always be expressed in terms of clearly articulated business goals, because the business goals are the things that people will be able to relate to instead of technical goals. And the feedback from the data governance is how well is the data strategy working, and the answer to that is that information should be conveyed using metadata. If we don't do that, we have very big risk of the organization getting completely off track and having its governance efforts not working well. As I mentioned before, that's one of the things we do is help organizations restart the efforts after they have failed the first time. Then and only then do we have the ability to say IT projects should be authorized. And notice that I show that that link is subordinate to data governance efforts. Data governance should be consulted and very often driving the specific IT projects, because the IT effort has not worked out nearly as well with other organizations doing that. So that's what I mean by not aligning the data program with the IT projects. Data has to be managed as a program if you're going to share that. I'll show a little bit more in the next example. But when you try to do a data program in an IT project mentality, they say that the data has a beginning and an end. Well, unfortunately, most data lives beyond projects in organizations, and it cannot be managed well with a project mentality. However, it can be managed with a program mentality. Those of you that are PMI certified understand that and will certainly appreciate that distinction. However, it's not obvious to most of the rest of the folks that are doing this. Number 3, 7 deadly sins, we're at the third one, not implementing a robust programmatic means of sharing data. So building on what I said on the last slide, most students are taught this is how you develop a project. You have some requirements. The requirements are related to the what of the system, what the system should do. You have design, and those design conversations are about how the what should be implemented. Then, of course, you build the system, end up testing it, maintaining it, et cetera, in there. And yet we present this incredible fiction to students who are learning how to do this in college and university, that within this systems development life cycle, you can both develop and implement your software and your data. And again, that is so wrong. This approach can only work when no data sharing occurs. Think about it for just a minute. The thing that we have taught every college student for the last 30 years in here teaches them that they can build all of their systems requirements using the systems development lifecycle model. It is true that you can develop IT projects correctly this way. It is incorrect to think that you can develop data sharing programs with this project mentality. Let's look a little bit more closely at it. If I have a project that I'm working on in an organization, and I have data that I want to share with another project, Project 1 wants to share data with Project 2, Project 1 has got a box around it, and there are things to do for Project 1. Project 2 has a box around it, and there are things to do to support Project 2. However, neither Project 1 or Project 2 are likely to want to pay for
Peter, are you there? For some reason, we can't hear you. Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
There we go. Peter. Oh, there we go. Now we can hear you. For some reason, we lost audio from you. There we go.
Didn't touch anything on this end. Thanks. Do I need to back up any, Shannon?
A little bit. I think we lost the last 30 seconds or so.
Fantastic. Thanks. So I'll go back and start over on this one. Appreciate the heads up. So our goal here was to develop a robust means of developing shared data. And what we've taught people is all wrong, because the idea that you can develop both your hardware, both your software and your data requirements out of a systems development lifecycle only works when you have no sharing of data across projects. So in order to do this, what happens is Project 1 may have some data that it wants to share with Project 2. And Project 1 has a box around it that's its budget, okay? Project Manager, all the structures that are in place, and Project 2 has the same structures in place. So now there's an argument over whether Project 1 or Project 2 should fund the exchange of data that is going to be shared between Project 1 and Project 2. And what happens in many organizations is we develop a third project to share that data across both of those projects. If we try to solve our interoperability project by developing a series of in-between solutions to point-to-point connectivity, we know we are doomed in that sense. So shared data structures require programmatic development and evaluation. And again, those of you that are PMP certified will understand very clearly that data is a program, not a project, given that particular set of circumstances. So that's what I mean by not implementing a robust means of developing shared data. Number 2, 7 deadly sins here. We lack leadership in this area. First of all, think about it for just a minute. What do we teach knowledge workers about data? Formally in college and university, even in high school, the answer, of course, is nothing. And yet, the definition of a knowledge worker is somebody who deals with data. And consequently, we have a very large, undereducated population out there in terms of dealing with data. I have a case study that I do for some organizations. We're not going to do it today, but we ask the question, why should somebody with a PhD in chemical engineering have to know whether the Microsoft product FoxPro is Y2K compliant or not? And the answer is somebody with a PhD in chemical engineering does not need to know how that occurs. It's just not within their purview. And yet, if they're using this product and the product had not been made Y2K compliant, their results were clearly at risk. Let me show you another example of the same kind of thing. This is a query that we found in one organization that was running, and the organization had never heard of query optimization. They were just piling this stuff on. Well, query optimization can dramatically simplify the task that you are requiring the computer to do. And even though it may be just one query, I've worked with some organizations that repeat that query literally billions of times a day. And when they do that, they discover that they're dying death by 1,000 cuts. Because they don't know that they don't know to go look for savings, places where they can go in. Just making a tiny, tiny improvement in one area can result in thousands, millions, and even billions of dollars as a result of this. Data has long been a hidden IT expense, consuming between 20 and 40% of IT budgets as organizations try to migrate, convert, or improve their data all the way around. Now that's the general population. Let's talk about IT professionals specifically. Most IT professionals get one course on how to build a new database. If there is a skill we do not need any more of on the planet Earth, it is how to build more databases. We need to change the overall education focus to a completely different way of thinking about this and teach them some more concepts around data management and around data as an asset. Because IT professionals take these courses, and so do our leaders, which means the impression they get from this education is that data is a technical skill that is needed when developing new databases. So if I'm creating a new piece of software, I don't need data people involved because I'm not using a new database with it. If I'm installing a package, I also don't need new data people around because the software has its own database, not a new one, but one that's there. In other words, only when I'm creating databases from scratch are these people needed. There's another problem with this as well. If the only problem you know how to use is a hammer, every problem tends to look like a nail. Again, slightly reworded from Maslow's hierarchy in that context, but it's very important to realize that. So we've trained 3 generations of students who've gone out of college and university not knowing that they don't know much about data in this area. In fact, it's so bad, in some universities they are still giving them this type of a problem example, which is about calculating the disk seek time on a hard disk. Well, you know what? The disks don't rotate anymore. Unfortunately, the students know this, and many of the professors do not even know this much. So it makes the students not appreciate what the professors are trying to teach them. Another aspect of all this, of course, is that we're asking hiring panels who don't know any of this to make decisions about putting people in data leadership jobs. And these are incredibly important to understand. We're working with a group right now in the federal government so that we can share the hiring panels across the various federal agencies. There is a bill that's supposed to be introduced into Congress sometime soon that will mandate a chief data officer for every federal agency. It's probably a good thing. I was involved in something called the Clinger-Cohen Act, which was the one that mandated CIOs go in for federal agencies. The federal government actually showed a good deal of leadership in this area. This is as a result of the Equifax backlash that we're getting, and we don't know whether the bill will pass, so we're not going to hold our breaths for this. But right now, if you have a bunch of people who don't know much about data leadership trying to hire people who are supposed to be data leaders, we have a problem. The leadership in the data area should be on par with the other top jobs in the organization. I like to call it the top data job. I've already mentioned I like the enterprise data executive. The most typical name for it is the chief data officer. And that position, whatever it's called, should be leading the data governance organization and working with the top IT job in order to try and further the organization's ability to bring systems and data together in order to work correctly. Now, most organizations don't have an individual that is solely dedicated to data asset leveraging. That would be an improvement. They are still constrained by the IT mindset. Funny, I was working with another group the other day that had had project management introduced to them only in the last few years. You might think to yourself, gosh, where have they been? Well, it doesn't matter. As long as they've discovered it now, that's a good thing. And finally, we really do need to have this individual reporting to the business and not into IT. There's a lot of reasons for this. The two primary ones are that IT is largely a project-oriented organization and consequently will not deal well and has not dealt well with trying to implement programmatic activities in there. The second one, though, is that the business are really truly able to assess the value of the data to the organization much better than IT, who is not penalized when these things don't work. We're seeing that 90% of organizations will likely have appointed chief data officers in the new by the end of the year after next, 2019, according to Gartner, and we're well on track to make that. We think there are about 3,500 CDOs that are out there right now. There'll probably be lots more before we finish all of this. Yet there is something interesting about the chief data officer position, and that is that the first one is likely to not be very successful because they have to overcome all of these deadly sins. So if you can imagine the first chief data officer addressing correctly the culture management, the data strategy sequencing, the expectations management that I've already described here, aligning IT projects, developing a robust means of sharing data and finding leadership, they've probably made enough people mad at the organization at that point that they're probably going to get said, thank you very much, go on, and the next executive is going to come in and say, thank you for paving the way for me so well. So that's what we mean by taking one for the team. So with our last 15 minutes, I'm going to talk specifically about data-centric thinking. Most organizations claim to do some variant of data-centric thinking, and I'm going to give you our take on it here. I think we've thought about this a little more deeply than most people have, but I'm still going to caveat this with one of my favorite sayings from George Box, who said that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And I'm putting this out there as I think this is stuff that's useful. It seems to be getting some positive feedback. We'd look forward to your feedback, of course, in all this area. Let me dive into a data set that a website that I put out there called the Data Doctrine. So that's a real website. You can go out there right now and see the datadoctrine.com in there. And we've had well over 100 people sign up for this thing already. If it looks somewhat familiar, that's because it should be. I went to the Agile Manifesto and used their words. The first part of the Agile Manifesto says, we are uncovering better ways of developing IT systems by doing it and by helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and that's where the Agile Manifesto copy stuff stops. I'm going to go through 4 of these things with you, and all I'm trying to say here is the same thing the Agile people were. It's not that their stuff on the left is better than the stuff on the right, but while we value stuff on the right, we value the items on the left more. And that's all the Agile Manifesto said, and they have done some tremendous good work there, so I'm hoping to build on that work. The first one is that data programs must precede software development. The reason for that is because we've already talked about not being able to match up this inherent deficiency that we have between data programs, which need to be a programmatic effort the same way as your HR program needs to be for your organization, as opposed to a project. So I don't know what the caption for this diagram is, but it certainly shows a lack of coordination and things structurally not matching in there. Let's look a little more carefully at this. In organizations, IT has gotten very, very good at delivering excellent value when they're trying to do things. Basically what happens in IT is that the organization will say, hey, I need this particular gap filled, and IT can fill that particular gap. However, when we look at data, data operates at a different cadence, a different rhythm. An IT project starts and an IT project stops. Given that, it's very important to recognize that that is appropriate for projects and inappropriate for programs. Data programs and data itself evolves at a different cadence, a different rhythm, however you want to think about it as, where your data will go from your current state to whatever the future state is. For this reason, we need to separate. We need to make it external to, and we need to precede the systems development lifecycle activities. More succinctly, data management and software implementation must be separated and sequenced. This is what it means when data programs precede software development. If you are developing software without full understanding of data requirements, you are wasting your money. And this is the biggest problem that we've had with Agile development. If we're in the middle of an Agile sprint, the culture of most organizations says, well, we can't stop now, we're sprinting. So we'll just make another small pile of data. And I say that's wrong. You should really be going to go after the shared data that has been developed programmatically for your organization in order to do this. Again, data evolution needs to be separated from, made external to, and precede systems development lifecycle activities. The second piece of this is that we need to have stable data structures that precede stable code. So what does that mean? Well, here's an example that I've used a lot over the years. This actually dates back to a problem that we had at the Department of Defense. In the DoD, when we were trying to do a model for the entire system and a system to pay all of the Defense Department, which is, as you imagine, a non-trivial process, we were looking at a specific requirement. The requirement was this. I'm expressing it as a business rule. Excuse me, let me make sure I do this absolutely correctly. The software package that they were proposing for us to use implemented a business rule that said one employee can be associated with one person. That's the business rule number one. And what that meant was that if somebody was moonlighting, somebody was working two jobs, then we would have to manually process them. Now, in the Defense Department, in the time that I was working with them, which was the late 80s, early 90s, the 30% of the DoD workforce had a second job within the Defense Department. So that meant 30% of the payrolls were having to be manually processed around that. And clearly, a better business rule would have been something I'll put up on the next screen here. But let me show you one other business rule because it just worked out perfectly this way. Again, one employee can be associated with one position, which meant that if we were going to manually share jobs, they had to do it outside of the system. Now, these were the proposed system that they wanted us to use in the Defense Department. The actual requirements for this system look like this. I've changed the diagram just slightly and highlighted things in red there so that you can see them. A person in the Defense Department clearly should be one or more employees. That flexibility is key. That data structure is necessary to the business success of the Defense Department, with 30% of the workforce taking additional jobs within the organization. And job sharing, we can't have an employee work from 8 a.m. in the morning till 12 noon and then somebody else work on it from 1 in the afternoon to 5 p.m. in the afternoon if the systems don't support it. The only alternative is to manually process it. So again, here's our first piece of this where it's just one for one, right? One person, one employee, and one employee, one position. The DoD requirements were very clearly one person can be multiple employees, and one employee can fill multiple employees can fill one position. So again, very, very clear business rule requirements on this. The reason I'm saying this is important for stable data structures preceding stable code is that if I started to write some code and compare the two structures, so the more flexible data structure is the one on the left, the one that the Defense Department required for those years, with the component on the left there. All right? The one on the right is the less flexible data structure, the one that was proposed. If we're going to write some code to process that software all the way around, it means that the code on the right-hand side to support that right-hand side of the page requires two additional structural loops in order to make to give the same functionality as the processing on the right. So if I don't understand the data structure, I cannot write the code correctly in order to do this. Hence, data structures must be specified prior to software development, acquisition, implementation. Go with the third one. Shared data must precede completed software. Shared data, most people don't really understand what data is, so it's this vague thing in the upper left-hand corner of your diagram, that little gray triangle. Now, when we use the shared data, we actually ask at a project level, hey, have you got any information on, let's just say, customers, and we bring the customer data down and we finish the IT project. Where we have failed miserably is updating the shared data source. back in there, pushing that data out there. And you can see on this diagram, the next piece of that gray triangle is more defined. It's less vague. And if we keep repeating that for IT project after IT project, the ability of data, shared data in particular, to become more useful to the organization becomes obvious. Quickly, you gain a critical momentum with the number of the number of requests increasing, the utility of those requests increasing, and data's contribution increasing and becoming recognized. So again, shared data structures cannot exist without programmatic development and evaluation. Last little bit of the data doctrine here then, data reuse must precede reusable code. If we're looking at data and its reign in here, its domain, we'll call it that, application domain 1 may have 3 programs that are associated with it. Those of you that don't recognize it, that's the old flowcharting methodology for a disk-based system, which is what we use called databases. So there is a database there in gray, and it serves programs A, B, and C. But if I've got another project going on at the same time, where I have a green database, and now it's working on D, E, and F, and an orange one over here that's working on G, H, and I, who is going to control all of the decisions about common data usage? We cannot do this from a project mentality. It just doesn't work. If I'm going to change a specific program, then I might make 9 changes max, 1 for each of the programs. But if I'm going to make a change to the data, the worst case is actually much worse. We describe it as n times n minus 1 divided by 2, or in this case, 36 possible changes. And again, you can see this is increasing at an increasing rate as opposed to the program, which is only increasing its complexity in a linear fashion. So these are the 4 tenets of the data doctrine. Data programs precede software development. Stable data structures precede stable data code. Shared data precedes completed software. And data reuse precedes reusable code. These principles are the principles that we've put out there at thedatadoctrine.com. If this is of interest, our goal is to transform this website into a wiki page so that we can then engage you all in the conversation. And if you'd like to visit that page and leave us your name and email address, we will absolutely be in touch shortly with you regarding how all of that works. Again, the website is www.thedatadoctrine.com. So let's go backwards now. You now understand what it means to be data-centric thinking. You understand that it is a challenge for most organizations to find qualified data leadership. And the remedy for that is, of course, to try and exchange as much information through networking and other informal sources as you possibly can, because your formal sources are not going to be aware. It is not possible to implement data sharing without a robust programmatic means of implementing shared data. It is not possible to align IT projects with data projects. They have to be done from a program to project alignment. It is critical that you manage expectations about what's going on. Anybody that tells you you've got 5 years for results, good luck. Number 6, you need to implement data strategy in a fashion that leverages your assets, your people, your ability to do the things that you're trying to do, which means not trying to do everything at once, and implementing your data strategy in a series of bite-sized chunks. And finally, all of this is critical that you do not ignore the cultural and change management challenges that we have around these issues. If you're able to do this, it is our hope that you'll be able to take data from this sort of bat sign that most people think of as between IT and the business and realize that it's actually much broader than all that. That instead what you have is IT and the business both grappling with data, but doing so in a coordinated manner so that you're able to come up with good information for your business as well. If you'd like more on that, of course, there's a book that you can now download from Amazon, and I'm pleased to announce today that we have broken the 100,000th best-selling book at Amazon. And when you consider my first book started off at the 4 millionth best-selling book, I consider that to be a little bit of progress. So now we're back to the best part of what we're doing, which is you guys get to ask some questions. So hopefully you'll have some good ones for us, and either way, we'll hope to see you at the next one of these, which is December 12th. where we're going to talk about metadata strategies. Shannon, back over to you.
Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation, and I see some questions coming in. If you have questions, feel free to submit them in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen in the Q&A section. Just to answer the most commonly asked questions, a reminder, I'll be sending a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides, links to the recording of the session, and anything else requested throughout. Jumping into the questions here, Peter, but how is quote-unquote employee defined? Do they need a separate employee ID to work 2 jobs in the Department of Defense?
Our data modeling colleagues that are out there. So great question, and I did not correctly, you're calling me on this. A data model is incomplete if it does not show both the relationship of the data and the definitions of the data. And I neglected to show these definitions, but yes, in this case, an employee of the Defense Department had a precise meaning, and that precise meaning was somebody who worked for the Defense Department in this case in there. So yes, you should absolutely look at that given that particular set of circumstances. We had been down that path already. We knew what the definitions of employee were. We read the statutes from the DOD and were able to work on it. I was a Defense Department employee at the time. And again, the model on the right was what was proposed, but the model on the left was what was needed. And so given the same definition of employee in both of those, the model on the left, the more flexible data structure, met more of the Defense Department needs than the model on the right. And more importantly, we were able to add up the cost of the processing manually 30% of the DOD workforce every payroll period, and it ran into lots and lots of money. So made a very good, sensible case. It also made a very good economic case, given both of those circumstances. Great question, and thank you for catching me on that.
I love it. So why are most people so optimistic about the data they have until they really look at it, that is?
That's because they haven't actually looked at it. So that gets back to you know, what we teach knowledge workers about data. They assume that if it comes out of the computer, it must be in fact correct, whereas we in the profession know that that is sometimes the case, but not always the case. Think about it for a minute. We do an awful lot of education around how to do programming in IT and things like that, but the only course people typically get as an IT person is how to build a new database. That does not address the problem that we're facing at the moment. And this is for IT people. We're talking about people in general. People just assume, well, this is a true story. I was working for a university at one point in time, and they called me over to take a look at their faculty evaluation system. And their faculty evaluation used a Likert scale. That means a 1 to 5. You know, 1 star if you hate the professor and 5 stars if you like the professor. And they were doing averages on these so they could come up with some reports back to the faculty. And they called me in and said, hey, you know, we're kind of confused about the results that are coming out of this system. And I said, oh, okay, let's take a look at what your results are. And I said, well, look here, for example. Here's Professor X. And they had these types of you know, 1 to 5 inputs. And we're getting, the computer's telling us we're getting a 7 as the average. And I just sort of stopped and said, you can't get an average if your input's a 7. Can't get an average of 7 if your inputs are 1 to 5. And they said, well, you did. I mean, we put it in the computer and it came out the other end. I said, yeah, just because it comes out the computer doesn't mean it's correct. It's called garbage in and garbage out, although in this case it was actually good stuff going in and the computer was mangling, the program was mangling the statistics on this. Again, think about it from a, we had a standard deviation in there of about, you know, 8 points. You can't have a standard deviation on 8 points if your scale is only 1 to 5. People don't know that they don't know. If it came out of the computer, it must be correct. And yet, you know, this is what we see time and time and again because people are not data literate. By the way, that's the next book we're working on, so keep tuned on that one. Hopefully next year we'll add that to the webinar series. Again, good question. Hopefully that answered it.
I love that you're working on another book already, too.
Glutton for punishment, Shannon.
Indeed. And just to change direction a little bit here, how do you convince your organization that a CDO is needed? That's certainly not the first time we've had that question come up.
It's a great question. So my favorite response to that is Would you really want your sole, non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset, the only asset in your organization that you can't use up, that doesn't degrade over time, and that does exist at the strategic level, and that is a durable asset in nature, would you really want that not managed? And most organizations go, no, I guess I'd better have that managed. So is it everybody's responsibility? And if it's everybody's responsibility, it means it doesn't get done. So we've got to have leadership at that area. And for one reason or another, it has just taken us a long time to get to the level of saying, wow, we're going to do this. Now, I'll tell you a quick story on this. I mentioned I was involved in Klinger-Cohen Act getting written. It was very interesting work to do with the federal government. I'm looking for a slide here while I do this. Where's my slide on all that? Anyway, the first batch of CIOs were not very successful. It's not that they were bad people or anything like that. It's just that people didn't know what it was to be a CIO. And consequently, we ended up with a real mess on our hands where many of the CIOs didn't succeed. And even today, we still have a failure rate at CIOs. Most of them last 2 to 4 years. It's not a very good track record. Let me just give you how bad the track record is. For comparably sized companies, organizations, the chief financial officer for a comparably sized company that loses its CIO every 2 to 4 years, their CFO stays around for 12 years. So that is a pretty significant difference. There we go, that's the slide I was looking for. But if you've got people hiring who don't know what they're hiring for, they're going to hire people who can spell CIO or spell data. Half the time I go out to these CIO events, and I've done more than 50 CIO events in the last 5 years, and half of these people are out there either looking for a job or desperate to get one, but they don't know anything about it because we have no certification process, we have no set of standards that we'd like them to meet, and we don't really even have a good educational component. However, I will put in a shout for my colleague John Talbert, who is running a CDO boot camp out at the University of Little Rock, perfectly situated in the middle of the country to help out. And he had a conference there last week, which I think ended up going off very well. So outside of that one specific program, I'm not aware of any other academic offerings that help people to learn what it is you need to do around data leadership.
We've had a lot of comments come in around that as you were talking. One comment is that I think that is because if the business folks really knew that they own the data, they would have to really work to resolve all the inconsistent business rules around the data. They would rather it be an IT problem. Do you have another viewpoint on this?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point of view. We have not said where this function should reside. Right now, with data leadership, we have about 1/3 of them reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer, 1/3 of them reporting to CIOs, and 1/3 of them reporting into a CXO, typically, in this case, a Chief Risk Officer or a Chief Financial Officer. So we're going to have an experiment that's going to run for a couple of years here, and we'll see how these folks do and whether they are more successful in one place or another. The question as to where the CIO should report was something we explicitly did not address in the federal government to make sure that we could let the marketplace decide where that would be. This is a newly recognized function, and so we're not sure where it's going to end up. As I mentioned to you before, these are thoughts, these are my models. Hopefully they'll be correct, but some of you guys are actually going to help improve this process.
Yes, so do you have any thoughts on how you convinced your CEO that a CDO should not be in IT?
The easiest way to do this is to make sure that your CEO understands what a project is. Once you say to the CEO, and the CEO understands that a project is something with a definable start and a definable stop, and the data doesn't fall neatly into those categories, they will recognize that it should not be run by an organization that is largely project-focused. And that is really the main reason we don't want these things reporting up through CIOs, because they're having a hard enough time managing IT projects. That was where I started out. Remember, the 1/3 of IT projects succeed on price, schedule, and functionality variables that are in there.
There's a request here to see, again, looking up the IT to data to question mark slide.
I'm sorry, which slide is that, Shannon? IT to data?
Yeah.
Tell you what, I'm going to put them all. We'll do that. Let me do this though. I'll just put.
Yeah.
We'll put all the slides up, and if you can figure out which one it is, we'll go back to it.
Perfect. So, you know, Peter, one of the questions that came up last night that was brought in a lot of discussion was, you know, if you had to pick, you know, one core thing that everybody should continue to focus on that's so important in everything that we do, what would it be, and what is the new technology in your data strategy that everybody should be looking at? There's a lot of interesting answers to that, but what are your thoughts?
Great question, and I love to get into these kind of debates with people. So technology is really the last thing you should be thinking about. Most of the technology out there works pretty darn well. But the problem is if you start with technology, it's just the same as the application-centric development. The minute I mention that it's SAP, PeopleSoft, you know, or you know, SharePoint or whatever it is we're picking in terms of a technology, the discussion starts to go into that direction. When we've done studies and asked people what is the hardest part of systems development to do, the answer is doing requirements and not doing design. Now, let me just bring you through a scenario here. Most people think, okay, great, I've got some data, I'm clearly going to put it in a database, although, again, before I jump into that, we also have a problem in that colleges and universities have completely forgotten about hierarchical and network databases, which are 10 times faster than relational databases. And so consequently, if you have a network or a hierarchical database, you are better able to deal with some of the improvements that are necessary in processing speed as organizations scale upwards. So this is a horrible thing. We haven't even told students that there's these other options that are very, very well-proven technologies. Now, again, when we look at requirements, somebody will immediately say to themselves, okay, great, yeah, I'm going to have some data, and I'm going to put it in a database, and then they'll instantly start designing the database structures for them in their head. That's what database designers do. The problem is, if you are doing that work, you are not doing requirements. In fact, the use of the word database is absolutely forbidden during the requirements exercise. Requirements can talk about a data store. The selection of a type of data store may only be considered when somebody does design work. It is absolutely not correct to do it during requirements. And yet what we find over and over again is that people start to do this. They say, look, we're an Oracle shop. We're going to put it in Oracle. It's the way it's going to be, you know, or DB2 or whatever it is. And we're going to do that. And that is simply not the way to do it. It's the hardest thing in the world to keep people from doing design when they should be doing requirements.
Love it. And slide 66 is the winner for the slide that was in question.
Thank you for that. Now let's see if I can find slide 66.
It's amazing how many slides you can get into an hour, Peter. It really is.
Oh, that one. So this transition slide. All right. So what was the question around this one?
There was no question. There was just a request to see it again.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, it's a transition. So the narrative on this one is that most people in IT and in business think data is sort of this little blob that sits between the two. And what we really want to do is to change their perspective on this to say, no, it's not a little blob. It's actually something you need to grapple with. One of the reasons people need to grapple with this, and this sort of addresses something somebody else requested a little bit earlier, 80% of all organizational data is rot. Now, ROT is an acronym that stands for data that's redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And consequently, half the battle is figuring out which data you don't need. If you could reduce that data to something smaller than that, that would make your task easier. But it's just like advertising. Every marketing executive knows that half their advertising dollars are completely wasted. The problem is they just don't know which half it is. Well, we need to do the same thing here. We need to let people know that there is broader data to this, that data plays a much bigger role in the organizations than most people realize, and that still at the same time, while data does play a broader role, much of it is still not useful, and it just gets in the way at that point. So that's the point of that slide.
All righty. Well, that's all the questions for today. Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation, and thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. I love all the great questions that have come in. And again, I hope you can join us, as Peter mentioned, for next month, Metadata Strategies. hot topic, always a hot topic, metadata. We were just talking about here locally, you know, how it used to be that metadata was a dirty word a few years ago, but now it's safe to say it again and say it loudly.
And dare we say it? Yeah, we're able to say this again. It is kind of exciting. We're getting excited about this. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining in and participating, and thank you, Shannon, as always, for hosting us.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks all. I hope everyone has a great day. Cheers.
Sure. Bye-bye.